Good morning, everybody. Almost afternoon. I'm Linda Orsoletto. I am the City Club Board Chair. Thank you so much for coming today for this interesting topic on foster care. It really is about being inclusive of everybody, and as the marketing was saying, that even if we maybe don't have children or strictly involved with the foster care system, we are all a part of it to make it grow and be stronger. And that's what they're here to talk about today. Again, my name is Linda Orsoletto with the City Club. I'm the board chair this year. I would like to, if all of the City Club board members and committee members could please stand, please, and be recognized. They do so much for City Club. Look at all these people standing up. If you want to join these people, let me know or any of the other committee members, and they can tell you how to get involved. I also want to recognize our executive director, Kim Gammon. She's in the back. We really couldn't do this without you, Kim. Thank you so very much. I really mean that. And to all of our sponsors and volunteers, thank you, a heartfelt thank you for that. So I wanted to thank our sponsors, our platinum and our gold sponsors, ASI Wealth Management, woo! The City of Bend, Central Oregon Community College, Desert Pine Group at Morgan Stanley, OSU Cascades, St. Charles, Central Oregon Association of Realtors, and Brooks Resources. And we like to give these folks a lot of recognition because they are so vital to City Club, not only financially, but giving of their support. And that's really what City Club is all about. Yes, we put on awesome forums and topics to make you think and then to also tell your friends and neighbors about that, but we really wouldn't exist without their financial support, so we appreciate that. And if you would like to be listed among these sponsors, please talk with one of the board members or the people who stood up, or Kim, and we can get you involved with that. So as you know, we are continuing to work on our strategic plan, and we offer one of our values each month, and this month our value is connection. It states, we build and strengthen relationships in the community and collaborate with other civic organizations across the region. And that's really what we're trying to do, is be inclusive of all voices and do what we can to be a part of that. One last plug for City Club. We are holding a membership drive right now. If you aren't a member, please do consider being a member. If you are a new member, this month you will receive a free form, plus the member who refers you will also receive a free form. One editorial comment in here before I introduce Heather, our moderator for today. If you haven't already, please get out and vote. It's so vital. So today we are honored to have Heather Dion, who is the Executive Director of Court-Appointed Special Advocates, otherwise known as CASA. She will lead us in our conversation today, and a little bit about Heather. She spent several years working in the nonprofit communication and fundraising in the Willamette Valley before moving here. In 2018, she joined CASA as the Development Director and then was promoted to the ED in 2020. A tough time, we all know. She has her master's in business administration from Portland State University, and she is also on the board of directors of the Oregon CASA Network and a member of Rotary Club of Greater Bend. Please welcome Heather.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. As Linda said, my name is Heather Dion, and I'm the Executive Director of CASA of Central Oregon. And CASA is an organization that connects and trains volunteers to serve as court-appointed special advocates for children in foster care. And I'm really excited about today's topic because in my work, I get to see the impact that ordinary community members like yourself can have for children and families who are involved in child welfare. And I personally am looking forward to today's conversation because I find this topic interesting and rich and challenging and occasionally inspiring. And I'm hoping that that's how you'll walk away from it today as well. So I'm going to begin with some myths, next slide please, that I often will hear from potential CASAs or community members when they are not very familiar with the foster care system. And it looks like our font's pretty small, so I'm also going to say the myths aloud. And some of these myths, the first one is that children, the point of the foster care system are children should be rescued from abusive parents. And the reality is a little more nuanced than that. The most common incidents that bring children into foster care here in Oregon are threat of harm and neglect. And neglect is when a children's basic needs are not being met. And then followed by physical abuse or sexual abuse. So abuse might not look like what you think it looks like. I also find that most of the parents who have children in foster care deeply for their children, but they are dealing with other significant issues that deal with their ability to keep their children safe. Issues like substance abuse, issues like mental illness, domestic violence, inadequate housing, and poverty. Those are all issues that affect our community on many levels, as I know this group is very familiar with, and they're also topics of past city clubs. So again, this is why I think this topic is particularly interesting, because it connects to all of the other challenges that we're dealing with in our community. Another myth is that children in Central Oregon in foster care live in hotels. I think we may have seen that headline a time or two. And I can say that my experience working in the system, the first priority is to put children into homes with people who they know. So that might be family members, friends, relatives. And then if that's not available, then it's moving into a non-relative home, what we think of as a foster home, if that is available. And then occasionally there are times where temporary lodging is used, but what I have seen is that our system works really hard to keep that to a minimum and to move children into homes very quickly. Another myth that I've heard is that foster parents are abusing the system by taking money. So I'm using the term foster parents here. The current term that's being used is resource parent, so you may hear those two terms being used interchangeably tonight, resource parent or foster parent. And like I said, most children come into foster care and they are placed with somebody who they know. Well, that is a person who may not have expected to become a foster parent or be raising an additional child. So they certainly didn't get into it for the money. And then oftentimes foster parents do receive a stipend, but we also know that keeping and raising children can be pretty expensive, and it rarely covers the full cost of caring for that child. Another myth is that the point of foster care is adoption. The point of foster care is, in my experience, not adoption. Children are most likely to leave foster care by being reunited back with their parents or by going to a family member into a guardianship. And only about 20% of cases in Oregon in 2021 closed in adoption. Another final myth is that the issue of foster care doesn't affect me. That's other people's issue, that's other people's children. And I really want to challenge that myth here today. And what I'm hoping that you'll take away from our speakers is that our community has a really vital and important role in preventing abuse, supporting families, and helping children heal and thrive. This issue doesn't affect other children. It absolutely affects our children, and I think that what you're going to learn today from some of our speakers is things that we can do as a community, as individuals, for child abuse prevention, child abuse healing. And then what I'm also hoping that you'll take from this today is get inspired to get involved. So there are a lot of community organizations, a few of which you're going to hear about on our stage, that are actively working in this work. And on your table, you'll notice these great handouts that City Club presented. These are just a few of the different organizations here in Central Oregon who are doing this work, and they've put together information about their group and specific takeaways for how you should get involved. And I'm hoping that you will leave here today with the desire to take one of these actions that some of these organizations are requesting of us. Next slide, please. One slide back. Thank you. So what this looks like for current data of children in foster care in Central Oregon, this data is from CASA of Central Oregon, is that in 2023 there were about 450 children who spent time in care in Crook, Deschutes, and Jefferson counties. The majority of those children were from Deschutes County. That has increased slightly over the past few years, which I think is no surprise because we know that our population has increased possibly more than slightly in the past 3 years. But so that's what we're looking like when we're talking about kids. If people are like, who are these kids? They're primarily from Deschutes County, not all, and about 450 who spent time in care last year. Next slide, please. And this is a very small font slide, but just what it is essentially a very, very rough flow chart of what it looks like when a child comes into foster care, or how that process happens. And that process begins with a call, often begins with a call coming into the child abuse hotline. The hotline number is 855-503-SAFE, 855-503-7233. I'm saying that very clearly because it's a pretty important hotline. And what that is the hotline calls in, and then somebody there determines, okay, is this something that deserves investigation? When it deserves investigation, it gets sent to the Child Protective Services Division, CPS, and we'll hear a little bit more about that today. And they'll conduct an assessment to determine if abuse has occurred, if the child is safe, and if the family is in need of supportive services. If the child is determined to be unsafe, then CPS works with the family to try to provide those services. If the child cannot be deemed safe with those services, then a legal case is opened. ODHS goes in front of a judge. The state of Oregon becomes the child custodian, and that child is considered in foster care. And then we'll hear a little bit more from one of our speakers about what that looks like. And then the child is in care until they leave care. And what they leave care here in Oregon, like I said, is about half the time they leave care to go back to their parents. So their parents are able to ameliorate the concerns and the children go back home. After that, about 20%, the case ends in adoption. After that, about 15% it ends in guardianship, and then it may end in a child aging out or becoming emancipated. And that was a very, very high level over a very, very complicated system. And I'll just be honest with y'all, this was the hardest part of this presentation, was how do we take this very complicated system and simplify it down to an hour? And so next, to talk more about CPS and Child Protective Services, I'm going to introduce Amy Martin. Amy Martin is a CPS supervisor for the Oregon Department of Human Services here in Deschutes County. She has 15 years of experience in various roles of social service organizations, and she really values building relationships with service partners. Please join me by welcoming Amy to the stage.
Heather wasn't kidding when I was told to abbreviate CPS to 5 minutes. I was like, I can't even get through an introduction of myself in 5 minutes. But we have done our best to try to do that, to give you that broad overview of CPS. So if you can move to the first slide there. So my name is Amy Martin. I'm a Child Protective Services Supervisor. I am one of 4 in Deschutes County. I have 2 other colleagues that work with me in the Bent branch and then one in the Redmond branch. CPS is, as that Heather's overview showed, the call goes into the hotline. The hotline determines, have we met criteria for abuse or neglect to possibly occur? Then the hotline, if criteria has met, they send the case to us in Deschutes County or Crook County or Jefferson County or any other county in Oregon. And CPS is the investigative arm of the abuse and neglect allegations. We call those open assessments. So in our open assessments, we are assessing our current child safety need. So let's say we get a threat of harm for drug use being used in the home. Our role is to assess, is drug use occurring in the home and how is that affecting child safety? Right? So we're doing that investigative piece, not just if drug use is occurring, but if drug use is occurring and how is it affecting our children and what is the safety concern there? And so we do a thorough investigation with teachers, doctors, school workers, Sandy Schmidt, all these different community partners where I've seen so many faces represented here. And then we gather all that information to determine child safety. We are assessing for parents meeting minimum level standard of care. So minimum level standard of care is not our preferred level, It's not our wanted level. It's not what I like best or what you like best or what your great aunt did for you. It's our parents meeting that minimum level standard of care. And so people get nervous about calling the hotline. You can go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. But bringing ODHS into the situation is about supporting our families in the community. There are a lot of myths around CPS and the work that we do, and we are, continually trying to combat that. But really what we're doing is we're getting involved to support the families in our community. So we are always looking for those natural supports for families. We're looking at who are your friends, who are your family, who are the people that you rely on. Can we bring them in to help assist us with making sure that whatever behavior might be happening, that we can change that behavior while having your family and friends support you and keeping your children safe with the parents. Children do better with family. Hands down, it's what research shows. It's when you see kids with their family, you know that if children can be raised by parents, that's who should be raising children. Our role is, can we come in and support you with resources and services and different things so that we can help make that happen? So in addition to the family and friends, we're looking for those, what I call those unnatural supports, those really fantastic community partners that we can say, okay, let's bring in this, let's bring in this. We can get these people to help you, to be here, to manage safety. Being a parent's overwhelming. I don't know if anyone else has experienced it. I could speak to it. And that whole lie they shared with us that it gets easier as they get older, and 18's this magic year where everybody just evaporates into adult life. Like, there's a lot that takes supports in families to build up that family unit, to raise their own children and to get the kids safe, but to also keep them with family. We do a lot of work with parents in the home. So we bring services and resources to the home. We also do a lot of, do you have a home? Can we get you on a wait list? Can we provide this? Do we need to keep you in a hotel for a couple of days to get you safe from a domestic violence partner? So our best work is done keeping children with parents and supporting them in their own home environment. Only after all of those things are not attainable and a child is what we call present danger, which means if we turn around and walk out the door, there is imminent risk of this child being physically harmed, or emotionally harmed, at risk of their safety if we were to turn around and leave. Do we actually start a legal case? And a legal case is when we petition the courts and request temporary custody from the courts due to the safety concern that's happening with the family. So it's our last option. Very rarely is it the first. It does not happen frequently. We are working with parents and families for a long time before we get there. And so when people kind of think of CPS, like, when we show up at families' houses, we're not always really welcome because are you going to take my kids? And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So there's a lot of mandatory reporters in here. There's a lot of just adults, and I believe firmly that every adult has a responsibility to protect children when they see potential abuse occurring. And then we do the investigation part to determine if it's safe or not. So that is what our role is. And then I work alongside Joe Lowe, who is a child welfare supervisor in the permanency unit. Joe holds a BA in sociology from Oregon State University. He spent over 7 years working residential behavioral rehabilitation programs. And in 2018, he began working with ODHS Child Welfare. But what he didn't put on his bio, which is his most impressive trait, is Joe has really good taste in football, and he's an avid Dallas Cowboys fan. And so Our cubicles are only spaced one in between, and so I very much appreciate that, Joe.
Thanks, Amy. And in that very short amount of time, you had a choice to either love me or hate me before I even start speaking. So thank you very much for having me today. This is, I would say, a topic that's very close to me. I would say my background of growing up, I definitely had a lot of friends who were involved in the child welfare system. And so it was a really easy career choice when that kind of came into fruition later in my life. Could we do the next slide, please? The first thing I kind of want to talk about is Amy kind of talked a little bit about the CPS process. That's about 60 to 90 days when they're really assessing the safety of a child in the home. So when a case goes legal, and that kind of transitions from the CPS caseworker to a permanency caseworker, and that's the unit that I specifically supervise. Something I also want to bring attention to, the Adoption and Safe Families Act. This was a federal law put in place in 1997. Oregon law was already in place. The specifics of that law are really the safety and benefit of kids, their health and safety, and making sure that is something that is insured. So that also kind of puts some other things in motion. I think we hear a lot about kids, being in foster care for long periods of time. This law actually made it so at 14 months, that is the allotted amount of time that parents have to address the safety concerns involving that child and hopefully get towards the plan of reunification, which Amy talked about, which that's our primary plan in every case is reunification. So parents have a short amount of time, 14 months. I would say is short considering some of the things that we address that Heather talked a little about, like substance use. Is 14 months really a time to unwind, decades of trauma, decades of substance use, generational trauma and poverty? I would think not, but however, it's a good starting point because you'll have some parents that'll be really involved from day one, and you'll have some parents that maybe struggle to get involved. Maybe there's some barriers they need to overcome before they can actually start taking an active role in a case. This law also said that not only is reunification our primary plan, but we also need a concurrent plan, so a backup plan. We never want kids to dwindle and be in foster care for longer than they have to be. So that is why caseworkers in my unit are tasked with 2 plans. So they're constantly working with parents and children on attempting reunification. And then at the backup, they're saying, hey, family, friends, relatives, neighbors, supports, would you be able to be a resource for this child if we're not able to accomplish this? So we're having 2 plans in motion with the hopes that one of those plans would be successful. I think another misconception that also happens is case plans aren't just changed on a whim. The court has to sign off on every case plan change we make. And I think that's pretty important because it allows the child, the parents, CASA, any other legal parties to be able to weigh in on if they agree or disagree with that, and then sometimes setting another court hearing, a trial, and then having more of a discussion on justifying why that would be necessary. Could we do the next slide, please? Another thought that I have when I think about working with families is the strengths and needs of families is really important. We identify that at a really early stage. So right after a case transitions from Amy's unit to permanency, we hold what's called a family engagement meeting. We have a facilitator in office. They bring parents in. They bring the caseworker that had the CPS case as well as a new permanency worker, and they really start diving into, okay, what are the strengths of this family? What can we capitalize on? How can we leverage those strengths into helping this parent become successful, helping this child achieve safety? It's also another good time that permanency worker is also assessing the parents for what does that parent have that they need to have to be a safe parenting resource for their kid. I would say that is an ongoing discussion, and families are dynamic. I think a lot of our families change over time. So I think it's something that also requires more than just 60 and 90 days. Sometimes understanding the family dynamics, understanding who the support system is. I know CASA has somebody in our office, and they work with a program called Family Find, where they specifically create a genome for every family and goes specifically into all the relatives on both mom and dad's side, which is really helpful when you talk about seeking out additional relatives. That can be a place and resource, because the goal is to keep those kids within their family. What does it take to get a kid back in your home? I think that's something that we have parents ask on a daily basis. What do I need to do to get my kid back with me? And so when Amy's talking a little bit about minimum standards, what are those standards? So I kind of put those up on bullet number 2. So for an in-home safety plan to be implemented, we need to meet 4 criteria. First is a home-like setting, so a sustainable place where kids can be returned home to their parents. And that looks different across the board. A parent could be living in their car, for example, and that can still be considered a home-like setting as long as we're able to achieve that, parents are able to meet that child's needs. Are we able to meet that child's hygiene needs? Are we able to get them to medical appointments? They're attending school. So that can look very different in a lot of different settings. No barriers. So no barriers specifically to child safety and our safety service providers being able to then achieve that safety in the home. So that is, I would say, what we're kind of addressing with, we have 80% of our cases involve substance use. So in a lot of our cases, having a predictable home-like routine. Do we know that mom and dad are going to be home when the kid goes home from school? Do we know that there's, a caregiving resource if that child was to be pulled out of school early? Do we have kind of like the logistics of childcare figured out? Are parents making progress where we can now start to kind of move towards them being willing, which is willing parent number 3. So are parents willing to follow the safety plan? Are they willing to work with the safety service providers to ensure child safety? They need to be in agreement with the plan, and I would say that's something that we really focus on is through our safety service providers. So a safety service provider is somebody that the family can identify that we can then run a background and a child welfare history check and vet that person to be credible in intervening if a child safety issue arises during the in-home plan. That supervision by safety service providers can look very different. That can be somebody living in that parent's home for a short amount of time to be able to intervene if something happens, or be able to report back to DHS that, hey, parents are struggling with this, what can we do to problem solve? That can also look like somebody checking in a couple days a week, maybe one time a week. Definitely when we get to the end of our cases, we really try to kind of pull back some of those supports and see how are parents able to then parent without the need of someone to be constantly monitoring them and ensuring child safety. And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can monitor that. I think our main focus is really focusing on natural supports. You've probably heard that term used a lot today. Those are the people that stick around. And very much at the CPS level, that's when we're kind of assessing the case. Who do we have involved in this kid's life that can help achieve child safety? Because the point of permanency is really to work towards reunification, and our goal is to be there for a very short amount of time, provide the resources, provide the planning, provide the buildup of that natural support, and then be able to step away and have that family function without the need of a state government intervention. That is ultimately our goal. So those natural supports are really important. So identifying relatives, friends, kith, kin, neighbors, service providers, educators, that's really important for kids. And, at the start of kind of my presentation, we talked a little about kind of unwinding that trauma. And there's a lot of different ways you can unwind that trauma, but a lot of times kids in our system experience a lot of trauma as a kid. And it's really important that we get them connected with the appropriate resources to help them address that, to hopefully kind of curb some of those things before they start becoming real issues when their brain becomes fully developed at 25. So one of the things that we really do is try to partner with our community partners for mental health, and who can, again, be a resource for kids after we step away and we know that kid is going to be safe with the parents. So next I want to introduce Gabrielle. Gabrielle is a licensed clinical social worker and oversees the Kids Center's Therapy, Family Advocacy, and Prevention Department. Gabrielle joined Kids Center in 2016 and previously was a therapist who provided intensive in-home intervention with at-risk families to prevent out-of-home placement due to abuse and neglect and supporting reunification.
Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here as we collaborate to better understand our system and support our children in our community to be safe. As Joe said, I'm from Kids Center and here to talk to you a little bit about Kids Center. Next slide, please. Kids Center is a child advocacy serving Central Oregon, and our goal is to improve services and outcomes for families impacted by abuse. We collaborate very closely with our community partners, including ODHS, law enforcement, and the DA's office. And as both Amy and Joe spoke to, Kid Center and a Child Advocacy Center is here to gather information to aid in that child abuse investigation. Next slide, please. So how do we do that? We see children ages 4 to 18 who come through Kid Center referred by law enforcement or DHS, where there has been a disclosure of abuse or strong concern for alleged abuse. Kid Center is a child-friendly, trauma-informed agency. So I think it's really important to understand that when these children and their families come to Kid Center, they have a lot of choices. Children hear right off the bat that when they go into the forensic interview room and share their story, that they have choices of what they share, how they share it, if they need to take a break, if they need to go to the bathroom, if they need to go and get a sip of water, then that is their choice to do so. They have a lot of autonomy in that room. So a child comes in to share their story, and they meet with a forensic interview. They sit down, a one-on-one session with a trained interviewer. These interviews are tailored to meet the developmental age and cognitive abilities of that child that comes in. The interview is recorded and observed by law enforcement and ODHS. And the intention of that is to minimize the number of times that children need to tell their story. When at Kid Center, a child receives, after the interview, a child-friendly head-to-toe medical exam. That's another opportunity for a child to disclose. So the medical examiner will do a full assessment of the body to look for any injury. They're also asking children, has anybody ever hurt your head? Have you ever hurt your stomach? Have you ever had any other injuries or impact to your body? So again, that's another opportunity to share their stories. We have no shots. There's a lot of options in there as well. Children have the choice to change into a gown, to do the genital exam. And when children come through Kid Center, they gain a family advocate who meets with them and is a support to them on site during the evaluation, and then moving forward for up to a year plus as needed, connecting to our various partners and resources and providing emotional support. We have a therapy team, evidence-based trauma therapy at Kid Center, and we have a wealth of resources in our community. So we do assess for the need and the desire of not only the child that's coming through, but any siblings or parents that are there as well that may need therapy. We see obviously a lot of parents with generational trauma who have been abused as children. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the exciting part. Take extra notes here. What can you do? And I think it's been mentioned earlier that it is the responsibility of adults to protect children. And we can do that in many, many ways. We have a robust prevention program at Kid Center. If you go to kidcenter.org, you can learn all about the various trainings and events that we hold for adults and children as well. So first off, take a Kid Center prevention training. Learn the signs and facts and report abuse. We know that 90% of those who have experienced sexual abuse know their perpetrator. Family member, close friend, so within a very small circle. Signs of abuse is, a child who was once very engaged in sports, engaged with friends, engaged in school, becoming less engaged, increased withdrawal, potential signs of anxiety and depression. Notable injuries on a child that doesn't necessarily match that child's mobility level. These are all, different potential red flags. Poor hygiene. A child that really doesn't want to go home is telling their teacher or somebody at school, like, I don't want to go home. going to a friend's house, not wanting to return home. This is where your ears perk up and you start talking to kids. Second is connect with families you know. Foster care families absolutely need that support. And it's as simple as knocking on the door, holding a barbecue, saying, I got an extra thing of milk, I'm running to the store, do you need anything? How are you doing? I'm here. Those natural supports that Joe highlighted at the end, we are all those natural supports and can be those natural supports for children. And then engage in community activity and community projects. Parks and Rec has a lot of things going on, libraries, take a training, talk about it. I think abuse is something that we need to talk about more because awareness and conversation is prevention. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Paisley Puwan, who's a behavioral health consultant at Mosaic Community Health. Paisley is an LCSW and worked for the Superior Court in California for over 15 years. She teaches classes for MSW students and is currently with Mosaic Community Health. She is an adoption competent therapist. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for being here today and thank you for having me. I'm with Mosaic. I have worked with children and families for a very long time because I absolutely love it. So I am going to share a little bit about neurobiology in the brain. So you're going to get a little education lesson. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of research over the last 10, 15, 20 years that has really advanced our understanding of the brain, children, child development. And so I'm just going to go over a few things to kind of pass along some tidbits of information and some takeaways for all of you. When kids experience scary things, or as we call it, trauma, or I like to call it disruptions, attachment disruptions, where maybe they're removed from their family or separated from their family for a period of time, it does impact the brain. And that's why a lot of times we may see some really big reactions, big emotions, or a need for control. Or controlling behaviors. So I'm just going to kind of go over a few things that we may see in a child and the different areas that they are impacted. So one is the brain. You may see in a child difficulty thinking, learning, or concentrating, impairment in memory, difficulty switching from one thought or activity to another, or what we call transitions. Sometimes take longer or be really challenging and difficult for children. Next slide. Also in the body, there are things that we may see, inability to control physical responses to stress, stomach aches, headaches, difficulty, chronic illnesses that can sometimes even go into adulthood. Next slide, please. So emotions, these are some of the range of emotions that you may see for children who have been through some scary things or some difficult things. Feeling unsafe, difficulty regulating their emotions, difficulty with attachment or trusting, depression, anxiety, perhaps low self-esteem or self-confidence, troubles with friendships. Next slide, please. Some behaviors, lack of impulse control, fighting and aggression, substance use, suicide or self-harm. Next slide, okay. So, but there's some good news. So I went over like a lot of maybe scary things, and I know earlier we've heard some maybe really difficult things that happen to children and to families. But the good news is that we can build resiliency through rewiring the brain. Again, the research is really informing us that the brain is flexible and malleable. We can shape the architecture of the brain, which is wonderful. We can retrain the brain and how it responds to the environment. We can build new pathways. We know that connections that are used more grow stronger and permanent, and that we know early intervention is key, because as you may know, like early childhood development, children are growing very rapidly. Connections are being made in their brains, connections are being made. And so we really have an opportunity to impact those connections and put them off into a different direction. This is accomplished a lot of times through pattern and repetition of behaviors. Children love to hear books over and over and over again. They love hearing the same song. Play that song again, play that song again, I want to hear it. Even physical movement and mobility, clapping, patty cake, running, jumping, doing repetitive actions are actually really working on rewiring the brain in positive ways and making really positive connections. And also we know nurturing and connecting experiences help to counterbalance effects of adversity. So what is it that each and every one of us can do? We kind of talked about how it takes a community. Even if we don't have our own children, we may have, be around children, have neighbors that have children. Most of us come into contact with kids. They're around everywhere you look. So what can we do to support kids? This is what makes me smile the most. Next slide, please. I know this is very small, but I keep this in my office because it is play. Play is so important. And it's also why play therapy is really important and usually recommended, particularly for young kids. It really is an opportunity for them to do what's natural, and it's helping with that rewiring and connection with the brain. And play is children's work. So play is very healing. The power of play is that it disarms fear, it builds connection, it teaches social skills, and it also teaches competencies like problem-solving skills. And each and every one of us can connect with, nurture, encourage, listen, and engage in play with children. With all of this, it can help to counterbalance adversity. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. So you've just heard from several professionals talk about child trauma and child welfare, but you may have noticed that there is a voice that you haven't heard yet, and that is somebody who has actually had lived experience within the child welfare system. So today we have Flora Malcolm-Lehman, who is here to share her thoughts and experiences. So I hope you'll offer a warm welcome to Flora. Thanks for being here today, Flora. So, is this the first time you've been on stage like this, answering questions?
Yeah, this is the first time I've never done anything like this.
Thank you for being here today. Yeah. Thank you. So, how do you describe yourself?
I'm resilient and passionate. I'm 20 years old.
Hold that a little higher.
I'm a first-time mom, too. I have a 5-month-old daughter.
Nice. And how old were you when you first came into foster care, and how long were you in foster care?
I entered the system at 13 or 14 and aged out at 19, so I made the decision to leave. And I did spend a lot of time in restrictional programs and resource homes and all over the place and on the run.
Yeah, thank you. And what do you wish that people knew about foster care? What do we get wrong about it?
There's a lot of stigma around foster care, and these children aren't broken. They're not any lesser than children you may have, children you may know. They're perfectly equal to every child that you know. And you don't need to be scared of them. These kids just need unconditional love. They have basic needs that weren't met, and they just need unconditional care. And it's not, giving them that care shouldn't be as complex as it is. And one thing that really needs to happen is attention being brought to it. I feel like people just won't bring it up like with their friend at a coffee shop type thing. And it's also, it's important to bring attention to it, and it's important to bring attention to older kids, because older kids kind of get looked over because they're like, oh, they're 16, they can figure things out type thing.
Yeah, thank you. How can people help and support kids who are in the system or who are in foster care?
There are a lot of resources we have here in Central Oregon. That's one thing we're pretty good at, is we have a lot of different companies that are here to help. And one thing that you can really do is bring attention to it, is you can talk about it, bring more of your community members to events like this, or even like just calling to see what you can do. There are little changes you could make on a day-to-day basis that would make a noticeable impact if more people did them.
And who brought, what is a resource that has been helpful to you?
Yeah, personally for me, J Bar J has been a huge part in my growth and my journey in the system. And other great resources we have are J Bar J, Every Child, and CASA is amazing. CASA, you work with CASA.
Didn't.
CASA's
Thank you. You
great.
didn't say that, but thank you.
Yeah. No, CASA is great. It's something that we really need, and it's also important for younger kids and older kids who weren't taught how to present themselves or when to speak up. One thing that is huge in foster care is preventing kids from going into a system. So something like that is good for prevention would be like fan advocates. Like you could call a local school and donate to a fan advocate and make a big difference.
Yeah, thank you. And then I'm guessing it might be a little uncomfortable to be on stage in front of 150 people. So why was it important for you to be here today and speaking?
It's important for me to be here today because a lot of this is a perspective that you don't see a lot, or you do in a setting not like this. Like you might know someone with a foster child and get to speak to them, but you don't get to actually hear someone ask questions in a situation like this, and it's something that should happen more, and there are plenty of youth that I think could help bring attention to the situation, and it's good to hear from someone like me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Flora.
Yeah.
So do you want to say? All right, and now I'm going to invite the speakers up here for Q&A, and I think we only have a few, so come on up, speakers. And I think we only have a few minutes for Q&A, but if people would like to, and if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we have volunteers out there with microphones who will come to you. They will hold the microphone so you can ask your question. And I've been asked to request that people keep their questions brief and avoid statements so we can get through as many questions as possible. Thank you. And I see a hand over here.
Thank you for being patient. Right here. I'm here.
Hey. Hi. Thank you guys so much for putting this on. I am hoping to just find out, as I learn more about the different community organizations, what level of competency do your groups have around neurodiversity, around the different ways that we experience the world and communicate our needs, and how do you access more knowledge about that neurocognitive variability within people?
I love that question. This is working now. So at Mosaic, I am one of many behavioral health consultants. We all have training, experience, and knowledge, and a wide range of things. So I'm going to speak with pediatrics because I'm in pediatrics, and myself and my colleagues have a lot of experience in working with individuals with neurodiversity, which can present itself in a variety of different ways, right? And being sensitive to that. And then the other thing that a lot of us are very adept at is just making adjustments and modifications in how we may interact or the interventions that we may provide, whether it's with the children themselves or helping the parents in, I mean, a lot of what I do personally is I work with parents and trying to make what I call little tweaks to their parenting style to better meet the needs of their children or to work more effectively with their children, so that hopefully we're not getting into those like locked situations where kids and parents are just like not connecting.
Thank you. I have a similar question, but cultural, not neurodivergent. So what sort of cultural awareness were you trained in to make sure that it wasn't ethnocentric kind of approach to child welfare? Thanks.
Sure, I'll start it, and then Joe can lead into it. So cultural competency is a huge factor in all the work that we do. So a couple of years ago, the state started requiring every assessment that is open in child welfare to document the cultural aspects of the child's life and to really dig in and ask those questions
family has a unique culture, every ethnicity. So to start it narrow and go broad, that is what we're required to do. And we know that that has a lot to do with how we serve families. Is speaking to them where they're at and in their own cultural, aspect. And then, of course, we also have the ICWA law, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act, that passed in the 70s. That was very needed, and we are still required to follow ICWA statute, and that's very important to us. And that is a form that is required that we do for every assessment. Every time we assess, the very first thing at our very first visit with families is to gather also that information to make sure that they have tribal representation and that the tribe has a say in how the assessment goes and how they want to be involved.
Was that finished, or does anyone else want to? Okay. I'd like to know, how often does the child that's in the system, the foster care system, have a say if they want to stay with their current resource parent, go back to a situation, or another relative, friend, as you guys are describing? How much say do they have in that process?
They definitely have a voice. So they have their CASA and their attorney that are able to advocate for them in those settings, in the court setting. A lot of times, if we are very child-directed. So a lot of times, especially for like an older youth, they will direct us in a lot of different directions, like whether they want to stay at that resource or not. It's our responsibility to continue to provide certified resource placements for those kids. If no resource placements are able to be identified, then kids that meet a certain criteria, and it's on our policy and procedure, I think it was enacted a couple years ago, a child can choose to do what's called a self-selected placement. But unfortunately, that self-selected placement is what the child chooses, and ODHS is not able to provide like a monthly amount for that provider that they'd be staying with because we're not able to certify that person. So we have to get creative in providing additional resources for that child to make sure that we can continue to support them in that self-selected placement. But a lot of times it is very child-centered. We do have resource parents because they also get a say. So if a child really wants to stay with that resource parent, but that resource parent's saying, hey, I'm not able to meet that need of that child, a lot of times what we'll do is try to put more in-home services in place and figure out like what is it specifically that child is not able to have met in the home, and what can we do to do that before we add another transition. In permanency, I think transitions, I think it was also referred to as disruptions, that can be really harmful for kids. You talk about a young kid going and starting a bedtime routine at someone else's house. They don't know that they want, a certain bedtime story, a certain book, what time, what happens if they wake up in the middle of the night, where the bathroom is. I mean, a lot of those things are have a significant impact on kids, and so if we can reduce those transitions, that's our main goal.
Okay.
But it is, yeah.
And then I think Flora wants to share something about her experience with this one.
In my experience, it obviously depends on your caseworker and the resources available in that moment, like at that time. But in my experience, that's something I've also recently seen a big improvement with DHS, but I've personally had good experiences with being able to stay with friends' families, or being able to choose like, hey, I don't like this place, or I wanted to go to this place. There's obviously been like here and there problems, but that's something I think that CPS has definitely improved on in the last few years.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, excuse me, Ron Paradis, CASA advocate. Anybody in the room can be a CASA advocate, so we need more volunteers. Joe, you mentioned the 14-month timeline from when a case goes in to when it needs to be to the next stage. As you know, with some of the problems that are in the court systems and such, that doesn't always happen. Also, there are several steps along the way. It just seems to me the timeline from when a child goes into care to when the case ends is sometimes just tremendously long. What can speed that up, and do you guys think that that should be sped up, especially if it's a case where the child is not going to return to parent?
Yeah, 14 months. I mean, it doesn't seem that long. I think it's pretty quick. It seems very quick. I would say, I mean, a lot of different things impact that. I know we have certain cases that really depends on the parent's ability to start addressing the issues. We wouldn't be we wouldn't be changing the plan. ODHS has not changed that plan. If that parent's making progress, then we tend to extend that out. And so if that parent's making progress at the 14-month mark, we might say, hey, yes, we got to court. We're doing our permanency hearing, which occurs at about 12 to 14 months. So there's a possibility that we don't go and ask for a change of plan because that parent's making progress, and we think that that child can be returned in what's called a reasonable amount of time. And so if we can get that child returned in a reasonable amount of time, then we'll continue working that plan of reunification. And if we get to the next court hearing, which would happen a few months later, then we could request, if something drastically changes or parents have not been able to continue making that progress, then we could look at, changing the plan at that point. I think kids, and again, if we talk about, finalizing cases and kids not going home to their parents, really trying to figure out what's going to best meet that need. Is that adoption? Is that guardianship? So if a plan was changed to guardianship or adoption, the process in that of choosing an adoption resource, of ensuring that the supports after we were to step out were in place. There's what's called adoption and guardianship assistance. So if a child was to enter into an adoption or guardianship with a relative or somebody that's known to them or has been a care provider for a certain amount of time, DHS, until that child turns 18, would continue to provide that monthly stipend to that person to meet that child's needs. Not that it fully fulfills that financial obligation of a child, but that is a part of that negotiation process that takes place after that plan is changed. And I think just one last piece, because I feel like I'm going on a very extended answer. If you move towards finalizing, if we're moving towards finalizing adoption or guardianship, that parent has a chance to change that behavior and address that concern up until we designate the placement and finalize that placement. So even though the plan might have been changed, I've had parents had the plan changed, and we get ready to kind of move towards what's called a termination of parental rights. As we were approaching that, the parent made a significant amount of change, and we said, hey, we're not moving towards this finalization. We need to kind of pause. We need to look at expanding out visitation and see if we still can achieve reunification. So a lot of twists and turns and ups and downs. Cases can last anywhere from a few months to many years. So, and a lot of times those twists and turns and just kind of riding that wave with the family is what we ask our caseworkers to do.
All right, this is our last question.
We have one more after this.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for taking my question. My focus is really on the emancipated and the ones that age out. Do we have support systems specifically designed for those young adults that are being kind of thrown into an adult world, job training, adult training?
Do you want to take this one, Laura? Take it.
I think that there's definitely availability to resources. I have personally seen a lot of kids who aged out, had certain circumstances where they weren't going with families, and a lot of them won't push towards those resources. I feel like there could be more support building up to them that makes them feel comfortable utilizing those resources. But as far as actually having the availability to them, I think it's pretty good in our local area. I couldn't speak for all of Oregon or all of foster care, but I think that locally we actually have a pretty good setup. There could be more building up to it though.
Last question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Wilder, and I am a resource parent for Deschutes County. I am, two-part question. One, what role do you guys feel resource parents play in this process of reunification or any form of concurrent planning for a child who spends time in care? Part two, what do you feel is the barriers that make resource parents such an unsustainable role where there's a lot of changeover?
I'll say something really quick. You guys are angels because you're in a very precarious situation where there's a lot of unknown, right? Is this child going to stay with me for a long time? I think you're really putting yourselves out there emotionally too, in supporting a child, not knowing maybe they're going to go back to their family or maybe they are not going back to their family. So I think one is a huge piece of really putting your hearts out there and making yourselves vulnerable and being available to children with not maybe necessarily knowing what direction or how things are going to turn out. So that's just my comment.
And I'm just going to add that without resource parents, we can't do the work that we do. I mean, we call you guys at unimaginable times of the day and night and ask if you can open up your home for us, sometimes with very few items that we're bringing and stuff like that. Resource parents are what helps to build, like what Gabrielle and Paisley were talking about. Resource parents are the first step in building that resiliency for a child, to allow that safe space to land. And also just want to highlight that in our area, we have a significant shortage of resource homes. So thank you for the work that you do. And also for anybody else that might consider being a resource parent, or, you know, there's so many different opportunities. And I just want to introduce Stacy, who is here, and she's sort of our resource parent liaison for District 10, which is our district. And so if there's that little thing in your brain that says, maybe I could do that, you absolutely could do that. And it is a great service to our kids, and anyone that wants any information, Stacy's here to answer those questions. But thank you for what you do.
Stacy, do you mind raising your hand high so people can see you? All right, thank you. Do you want to say anything, Joe?
I think resource parents are essential. I think resource parents can really break down the barriers. We've had several resource parents that do a really good job forging connections, whether they're relatives of that person or whether they're a non-relative placement to that kid and that family. I think that they, again, when you talk about a kid, you know, experiencing foster care, that's horrible for a kid. And I think having the adults on the same page is huge. And so in ODHS, something we're really emphasizing over this next year is really working on icebreakers. So focusing on a meeting between the parent and the resource parent to kind of like have that overlap, to have that communication, because it is really important when we talk about, you know, meeting the needs of that kid, and for them to see that all the adults are on the same page and maybe not as, you know, having a contentious relationship. And resource parents also get the opportunity during a lot of our monthly visits, because we see kids on a monthly basis, to ensure their safety. And one of our common questions we ask resource parents and families is, you know, do they want to be a long-term resource for this kid, right? That concurrent planning that we were talking about earlier is always something that we're asking. I know sometimes resource parents, you know, we might disagree on, is that guardianship, is that adoption, how do we get there? We ask our resource parents to kind of support the case plan, but we also understand that, you know, they're putting their time, they're putting all of their effort, their tears, their late nights, every lunchbox into that kid. And so that's a significant sacrifice and a gift, really, to our community. So thank you.
What do you want to say, Flora?
Yeah, I think that resource parents are amazing, and obviously, like, we wouldn't even be able to hold seminars like this without them. But back to the question that you had asked, I think that one barrier that you should really keep up, because I've been with positive and negative resource families, is that what you're doing is great, but it's unconditional. These kids, like, they don't owe you anything back. You are here to do a certain thing, and those kids don't have to do anything back, like, for you. And that, you know, they can slam doors, they can be upset, and that you stay. And I think as far as the, like, boundaries thing goes, I think that you'll feel for it for each kid. I think if you talk and connect with each kid and, like, have open communication with them, you'll be able to see if they would like to be in a long-term placement with you, if they kind of feel, or they're still in a stage where they're like, I don't even want to think about staying with you, I want to go back to my family. I think that you can feel for each situation.
Thank you. We're going to do one last question from me because we're coming up on time. I just want to remind everybody about the resource list that's on your table. And we have several of these organizations here represented in the room. I've seen Every Child, I've seen Friends, I've seen ILP. So if you represent one of the resources on this room, please raise your hand. So if folks want to chat with you when we get done, so people know who they can talk with when we finish today. And then as our last question, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists, this can be a tough topic, and I know several of you have been in this work for a long time. So I'm just going to ask you briefly, what gives you hope? I'm going to start with you, Gabrielle.
All right, is this on? Okay. What gives me hope? What gives me hope is the children. And I think Flora spoke so perfectly about the children that are in the foster care system and their children. They have a blankie, they have a friend, they go to school, they like to swing. Their favorite food is ice cream. So you know, and I think that what I spoke to a little bit before is supporting them and their resilience and their journey for healing is totally doable. It takes everybody, but it's doable, and that's really hopeful. There's a lot of success in this, and I think remembering that kids are so resilient and deserve everything is important.
What gives me hope is to see the hard work that's being done. We have a phenomenal team of caseworkers that works in unattainable or unrealistic amount of hours doing the work that very few other people want to do, but they're doing it because they're there for the protection of our community, the protection of our families, and for the safety of children. It also brings me great hope to see the work that community partners are doing. Shelley IUB with J that runs the independent living program. It's amazing work that she does, the connection that she builds with kids and the fact that she's there. So I get a lot of hope when I see communities stand up to protect children and make it their priority to do so. And then these amazing kids, the amazing kids that are able to build that resiliency and come out of a very flawed and complex system and still find the pieces in it that still brings their life joy and meaning and all of that. So you can't do the work that we all do, everybody up here, without some hope that it's leading to something positive.
Wow.
Did I steal your
Yeah, took it all away.
You can just say ditto.
Yeah. I mean, Amy, that was a great answer. So I would just say kids' success, kids being resilient. I would say kids starting, in permanency, you see kids that start off and you start to build a relationship with them very early on. And sometimes you work with those kids for a very short amount of time. Sometimes you work with them for years. And I think seeing those kids become young adults, that's huge. That's a huge success. That gives me a lot of hope. And, when we talk about, what we can do to not, pass on that trauma, we're really, getting at the root of some of the traumatic things that kids have seen, and you're really helping that person become independent or helping that child achieve that goal or helping that family kind of be reunified and reconnected. That gives me a lot of hope, and that gives, I think, and we also need to just really believe that behavior change is possible for a lot of our families. And, there can be some horrible things that happen, and some people make some amazing transformations, and that's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, I'll say what gives me hope, and is a saying that I share with both kids and families, is that having really difficult challenges or scary things that happen can shape and inform us, but they don't have to define us. And to me, that's that resiliency piece. People can overcome really hard, difficult, challenging things and move forward and become better.
What gives me hope is seeing situations like this, where this is to bring attention to a matter that needs attention. And I think that a lot of people don't recognize that this is our community and that these kids are the future of our community. These kids will grow up and be the same community members that you are now. And something that gives me hope is seeing people bring attention and seeing people eager to help, resource parents and people who are eager to work in the system and do what you guys do, because I know it's crazy. And seeing so many people eager to help, and I hope that you all leave today wanting to spread word and wanting to talk about this and bring more attention to it.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for the great conversation today, and now we're going to wrap up with Kim Gammon, Executive Director of City Club, to conclude the program.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you to all our panelists today and speakers, Flora, Heather, Paisley, Amy, Joe, and Gabrielle, for leading this conversation. There are so many different perspectives and experience in a conversation like this, and we could have, filled a room out there and had you guys on the stage with the different experiences people have within the system and how it impacts us all differently. Our next City Club Forum is going to be June 20th, And it'll be how wildfire decisions are made, and it is in partnership with the Bulletin. Look for an article in the June 16th issue of the Bulletin on this topic. And then for members, an invitation will go out tomorrow to attend, and non-member registration will open next week. Thank you so much for being here today again. And as Linda mentioned, Election Day is Tuesday. It's come up very quickly. We do have candidate forums on our website if you haven't selected some of those contested races. And also you can find more information about candidates on Vote 411. Thank you so much for being here today, and we'll see you soon.